The first thing you need when you're splitting wood is a nice axe. I like this little K-axe that we make, and we also make a nice wilderness axe that looks like this. It's double-headed and a little heavier. The second thing to keep in mind is the structure of the wood. And when determining or examining the structure of the wood, the most important thing is to remember this. It all starts with the center of the tree. Trees grow, as everybody knows, in rings. They start out with the center of the tree, which is technically called the heart center, and the rings get bigger and bigger as the tree grows. When you cut wood and dry it out for your fireplace, the first thing that happens is it loses moisture content, and the wood shrinks as a result. And it's the outer rings that shrink the most because they're the longest. And when they shrink, they create cracks. For example, you can see this crack that radiates all the way down the side of this log. And the other thing about it is the crack radiates in and it points directly at the center of the tree. All of these cracks, in fact, that you can see in this log all point basically towards the center of the tree. And they create weak spots. And the center of the tree is the weakest spot of all. The other thing to remember is knots. You want to avoid knots when you're splitting wood. Almost all wood has knots, so it's hard to avoid. But the thing to remember is that you cannot split knots because the orientation of the grain of knots is contrary to the grain of the wood that you're splitting. So if you'll notice, you have all these cracks that radiate down, but for example, here's a little knot and the crack goes around the knot, but it doesn't go through it. So the weak spots are where these cracks are, for starters, and noticeably they are not where the knots are, they're where the knots are not. So those are the two things that you want to exploit. The main thing about knots is just like these stress fractures that are created by the wood shrinking, the knots are all pointed at the center of the tree. They all point directly at the center of the tree. So for example, if I take a piece of wood like this, it's got a knot here, a knot here, a knot here, and a knot here. All these knots, and a knot here, all these knots are pointing directly at the center of the tree. So when you split, you should orient your split so that it passes essentially through the imaginary center or through the center of the tree, and at the same time avoids passing through the knots. You don't want to split through the knots, and because basically you can't, because wood knots don't split. And so what you want to do is orient your swing or the way you split so as to avoid the knots. So for example, I take this kindling axe right here, and when I go to split, the first thing that I want to do is I want to take advantage of the weakness of the center of the tree right here. I also want to take advantage of the splits that are generated by the shrinkage of the rings. So here's a split coming up here. Here's another one coming up here. Here's one coming up the side this way. And here's another one coming up this way. And noticeably, all of these splits will point basically towards the center of the tree. So the other thing is that by going through the center of the tree and into the splits, we basically avoid the knots because the knots have the same radial orientation towards the center of the tree. So in this case, I want to hit right on the center, right here. I want to take advantage of this crack and this crack that pass through the center of the tree. So I'll wind up, give that a hit, then take this nifty leverage tool, embed the head, and all I have to do is pry this apart, stick it in laterally down here, and keep prying, and there it goes. I've got a clean split.